The jungle was alive. Dawn filtered through a dense canopy of twisting alien trees, their bioluminescent veins dimming with the encroaching sunlight. The air pulsed with the hum of unseen insects, and the occasional guttural cry of a predator. Takeshi Kuroda crouched motionless in the shadows, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. His cyber-enhanced vision scanned the terrain ahead, mapping every contour of the hostile landscape. Approaching target zone, came a clipped voice over the comm unit in his ear. It wasn't his, but a fragment intercepted from the Galactic Empire's comms. He adjusted the grip on his plasma katana, its hilt cool and familiar in his hand. Takeshi had been trained for moments like this, taught to move unseen, to strike without hesitation, to endure. His mission was clear: protect the crashed satellite at all costs. It contained Earth's most sensitive data, secrets that could tip the delicate balance of power between the Empire and humanity. A low hum interrupted the jungle's rhythm. Takeshi's eyes snapped upward. The dropship's silhouette sliced through the clouds, its engines a menacing growl that sent flocks of alien birds screeching into the sky. He sank lower into the underbrush, becoming part of the jungle itself. The ship hovered briefly before deploying its cargo, 10 figures in sleek combat exosuits, their movements unnervingly precise. They landed silently, their boots absorbing the impact, and immediately fanned out in formation. Each carried weapons gleaming with lethal potential. "Stay sharp," barked a commanding voice over the comms. Takeshi recognized it immediately: General Ko Varnak. The name alone sent a chill down his spine. Ruthless, relentless, and always in control, Varnak was not a man who tolerated failure. Takeshi's lips curled into a faint smirk. "Let's test that resolve, General." He moved silently through the undergrowth, his augmented senses guiding him like an unseen shadow. One of the assassins strayed slightly from the group, pausing to scan the area with a thermoscope. Takeshi watched, calculating the exact moment to strike. In a blur of motion, he leapt from the foliage. His katana hummed as it ignited, slicing cleanly through the assassin's weapon before the man could react. A second slash followed, silent and precise. The body fell, and Takeshi vanished back into the jungle. "Contact! Sector 7! Another assassin shouted. Chaos erupted. Floodlights burst to life, sweeping the jungle in search of their elusive target. Takeshi was already repositioning, scaling a tree with the agility of a predator. Below, the assassins regrouped, their movements coordinated but visibly tense. "Eyes up!" Varnak's voice thundered through their comms. "He's playing with you. Spread out. Force him into the open." Takeshi crouched high in the canopy, watching them move. Smart, General, but not smart enough. He activated a small EMP charge and dropped it into the midst of the squad. It detonated with a crackling burst, disabling their scanners and drones. Panic rippled through their formation as their augmented systems flickered uselessly. "Adaptive response now!" Varnak snapped. "He's exploiting your tech. Switch to manual protocols." Takeshi admired the quick recovery, but it wouldn't save them. He descended silently, dispatching 2 more assassins in quick succession. Plasma hissed as his blade cut through armor, leaving no time for cries or alarms. "Enough!" Varnak's voice growled, his frustration palpable. "Pull back and regroup. We're not dealing with an amateur." Takeshi allowed himself a moment to breathe. The odds were shifting, but the battle was far from over. He could feel the weight of Varnak's strategy pressing against him like a tightening snare. As the assassins retreated into a more defensible formation, Takeshi found himself in a rare moment of stillness. He crouched by a pool of water, its surface reflecting the faint shimmer of his katana. A flicker of memory surfaced, his father's voice, calm and resolute during his training. "Victory comes not from strength but from control. A storm is only as destructive as the hand that wields it." The hum of approaching footsteps snapped him back to the present. He melted into the shadows as 2 assassins approached, their movements cautious but determined. "I don't like this," one muttered, his voice muffled by his helmet. "He's toying with us. Keep your head. Varnak's got this under control. the other replied. Takashi struck before they could react, taking down one with a swift blow and disarming the second. The man stumbled back, scrambling for his sidearm, but Takashi's blade was at his throat before he could raise it. "Why Vorix's prime?" Takashi asked quietly, his voice steady but laced with menace. The assassin hesitated, fear etched into every movement. "I don't know. We just follow orders." Takashi pressed the blade closer, his eyes cold. "And Varnak's orders?" "To eliminate you and secure the satellite," the man stammered. Takashi nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and with a swift strike, the man fell silent. The comms in the assassin's helmet crackled to life. "Report in. What's your status?" It was Varnak. Takashi picked up the helmet and spoke, his voice calm and measured. "Your men are losing, General. Call them off while you still can." There was a pause before Varnak's voice responded, cold and sharp. "Impressive, Earthling. But this game isn't over. Not by a long shot." Takashi discarded the helmet and disappeared back into the jungle. The hunt was far from finished, but he knew one thing with certainty: Varnak had underestimated him. And that mistake would cost the Empire dearly. The jungle had grown quieter, the natural rhythm of life subdued beneath the weight of unseen danger. Takashi Kuroda moved carefully, his steps measured and deliberate as he navigated the labyrinth of vines and massive roots. Above, shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy, casting fleeting patterns of light on the jungle floor. His cybernetics pulsed faintly, adjusting to detect faint electromagnetic signatures. Somewhere nearby, his adversaries were advancing, their positions concealed but their intent painfully clear. They weren't just hunting the satellite. They were hunting him. A faint click stopped him mid-step. His gaze darted down, landing on a barely visible wire stretched taut between two rocks. A trip mine. Takashi crouched, his fingers hovering inches above the device. His HUD displayed the mechanism's internal layout in real time, mapping the components and signaling weak points. A deft twist of his wrist, and the mine was disarmed, the threat neutralized. "Getting sloppy, General," he muttered under his breath, pocketing the mine's activation core. The faint crunch of foliage alerted him to movement nearby. Takashi melted into the shadows of a towering root system, his breath shallow, his senses sharp. Two assassins came into view, their sleek exosuits reflecting faint traces of sunlight. "Sector 4 clear," one said, his voice clipped and professional. "Copy that," replied the other. "Keep eyes open. Command says he's still moving south." Takashi waited, his muscles coiled like a spring. As the second assassin stepped closer, his plasma katana hissed to life, its blades slicing cleanly through the air. In one fluid motion, the first assassin fell, his body crumpling silently. The second spun around, his weapon raised, but Takashi was faster. A throwing knife embedded itself in the man's visor, cutting short his alarmed shout. Takashi retrieved his blade and melted back into the jungle, leaving no trace of his presence. His mind was already on the next move. Varnak's forces were tightening the net, and the terrain ahead offered fewer opportunities for concealment. He needed to stay ahead of their calculations. The calm in his ear crackled to life. "Impressive work, Kuroda," Varnak's voice drawled, laced with cold amusement. Takashi didn't reply. "You can't avoid me forever," Varnak continued. "You've been clever, I'll grant you that. But cleverness has its limits." Takashi finally spoke, his tone calm. "If you have time to talk, General, you're already losing." Varnak chuckled, the sound unsettlingly close to genuine mirth. "Oh, we'll see about that." The line went dead, leaving Takashi with an unsettling sense of anticipation. The terrain shifted dramatically as Takashi moved further south. The dense jungle gave way to rocky outcroppings, their jagged surfaces riddled with alien moss that glowed faintly in the shade. The shift in environment was both a blessing and a curse. The open spaces offered fewer places to hide but granted him a clearer view of his surroundings. A distant hum drew his attention. Takashi climbed a large boulder, scanning the horizon. A sleek drone hovered near the edge of the rocky expanse, its sensors sweeping methodically. He reached for his EMP launcher, aiming carefully. The device discharged with a sharp crack, sending a pulse that fried the drone's circuits. It spiraled downward, crashing into the rocks below. The destruction of the drone brought swift retaliation. Within minutes, 3 assassins emerged from the jungle's edge, their weapons raised. Takeshi didn't wait for them to open fire. He darted to the left, using the uneven terrain as cover. Plasma bolts sizzled past him, leaving scorch marks on the rocks. He retaliated with precision, his throwing knives finding their targets. One assassin fell, clutching his throat, while another stumbled, his weapons sparking uselessly. The third assassin charged, wielding an energy blade that crackled with lethal intent. Their weapons clashed in a dazzling display of light, the hum of Takeshi's katana matching the assassin's strikes. "You fight well," the assassin grunted, his voice distorted by his helmet. "Not well enough," Takeshi replied, deflecting a strike and countering with a slash that severed the man's weapon arm. The assassin fell to his knees, his helmet tilting upward as if to plead. Takeshi hesitated for a moment long enough for the man to reach for a concealed grenade. Reacting on instinct, Takeshi kicked the grenade away, sending it rolling into a crevice just before it detonated. The explosion echoed across the rocky expanse, shaking the ground beneath his feet. Takeshi pressed on, his path leading to a narrow ravine bordered by steep cliffs. The air here was cooler, the shadows deeper. The sound of flowing water reached his ears, a faint stream winding its way through the rocks. It was here that he encountered the cyber assassin. The machine emerged from the shadows like a phantom, its sleek frame glinting in the faint light. It stood taller than a human, its limbs unnaturally long and fitted with integrated weaponry. "Priority target acquired," it announced in a mechanical monotone. Takeshi's grip on his katana tightened. He studied the machine, noting its balance and the faint whir of its servos. This wasn't a standard opponent. This was something built to counter him. The cyber assassin struck first, its arm transforming into a blade that slashed with frightening speed. Takeshi dodged, his katana flashing in a counter-strike that barely grazed the machine's armor. The fight was brutal and unrelenting. The cyber assassin's movements were precise, its strikes leaving no margin for error. Takeshi's reflexes were pushed to their limits, each swing of his blade met with a counter that sent sparks flying. "You are delaying the inevitable," the machine said, its voice devoid of emotion. Takeshi didn't answer. Instead, he feinted to the right, drawing the machine into an overextension. He struck at its exposed joint, severing a limb. The cyber assassin stumbled but didn't falter. It adapted instantly, its remaining arm transforming into a plasma cannon. Takeshi dove for cover as a blast tore through the rocks, the heat searing the air around him. He activated a smoke charge, filling the ravine with a dense cloud that obscured the machine's optics. Using the cover, he circled behind it, planting an explosive device on its back. The detonation was deafening, the force of the blast sending the machine crashing to the ground. Its body sparked and twitched, but it was still functional. Takeshi approached cautiously, his katana ready. He drove the blade into the machine's core, severing its power supply. The cyber assassin shuddered once before falling silent. Breathing heavily, Takeshi looked toward the cliffs. The jungle beyond loomed like a dark promise, its secrets waiting. He had won this battle, but the war with Varnock was far from over. The jungle was alive with menace. Takeshi Kuroda moved through the underbrush, his senses sharp. Every rustling leaf, every shadow, every faint shift in the air felt like a threat. The silence from General Varnock's forces wasn't a retreat, it was the calm before the storm. Takeshi stopped at the edge of a ridge, looking down at a massive clearing below. At its center stood a structure, a sleek, alien outpost rising unnaturally from the organic chaos around it. The satellite's signal emanated from inside. "Finally," he muttered. The facility was a fusion of technology and camouflage, its walls shimmering to blend with the surrounding greenery. Several guards patrolled its perimeter, their movements crisp and methodical. Above, drones circled in overlapping patterns, their sensors sweeping for intruders. Takashi crouched, his mind already mapping a plan. The dense foliage around the base offered cover, but the drones presented a problem. He needed to disable them before attempting an approach. Reaching into his belt, he retrieved a small device, a signal scrambler. He adjusted its frequency to disrupt the drone's control systems. With a flick of his wrist, he sent the device rolling down the slope. It beeped softly, then activated, emitting a pulse that sent the drones spiraling out of formation. "Target acquired," one of the guards barked, raising his weapon toward the ridge. Too soon. Takashi moved quickly, dropping into the clearing with feline grace. The guards opened fire, plasma bolts scorching the air. He darted between trees, closing the distance with lethal precision. The first guard fell silently as Takashi's katana sliced through his armor. The second fired wildly, panic evident in his aim, before Takashi's throwing knife embedded itself in his chest. The remaining guards hesitated, their confidence faltering as the legendary Earth operative dismantled their formation with surgical efficiency. "Takashi Kuroda!" A voice boomed from the outpost's loudspeakers. It was Varnak. "You're making this far too entertaining." Takashi ignored the taunt, pressing forward. He reached the outpost's entrance and placed a breaching charge on the sealed door. The explosion sent a shockwave rippling through the jungle, and he slipped inside before the smoke cleared. The interior was cold and sterile, a stark contrast to the vibrant chaos outside. The walls pulsed faintly with blue light, and the air buzzed with the hum of active machinery. Takashi moved silently, his footsteps muffled by the smooth floor. The satellite's signal grew stronger, guiding him deeper into the facility. But so did something else, an ominous sense that he wasn't alone. "You're predictable," Varnak's voice echoed through the corridors. "Every move you make, every step you take, it's all part of the pattern." Takashi didn't respond. Words were distractions, and he knew Varnak was stalling for time. He rounded a corner and froze. Standing at the end of the corridor was Varnak himself, his imposing figure flanked by two more cyber assassins. "You're resourceful," Varnak said, his tone almost admiring. "But even the best warriors fall eventually." Takashi's grip on his katana tightened. "You talk too much." With a flick of his wrist, he hurled a smoke grenade. The corridor filled with a thick, choking cloud, and Takashi moved, a blur of motion in the haze. The first cyber assassin charged blindly, its sensors struggling to penetrate the smoke. Takashi anticipated its movements, his katana slicing through its torso in a clean arc. Sparks erupted as it crumpled to the floor. The second assassin adapted more quickly, firing a burst of plasma in Takashi's direction. He dove to the side, the heat searing his skin. His counterstrike was swift and decisive, his blade severing the assassin's weapon arm before driving into its core. The smoke cleared, revealing Varnak standing alone. The general clapped slowly, his expression unreadable. "Impressive," he said. "But skill alone won't save you." Varnak activated a device on his wrist, and the walls of the corridor shifted, revealing a hidden compartment. From it emerged a massive combat drone, its form bristling with weaponry. The drone fired instantly, forcing Takashi to retreat behind a console for cover. The barrage was relentless, plasma bolts shredding the environment around him. "You can't hide forever!" Varnak called out, his voice cold and confident. Takashi assessed the situation. The drone's firepower was overwhelming, but its movements were slow and deliberate. He needed to exploit its lack of agility. Spotting an exposed power conduit on the ceiling, Takashi formulated a plan. He activated his grappling hook, launching himself upward as the drone recalibrated its aim. Swinging toward the conduit, he slashed it with his katana, sending a surge of electricity cascading through the drone's circuits. The machine convulsed, its systems faltering, and Takashi dropped onto its back. With precise strikes, he dismantled its core, neutralizing it in a shower of sparks. Varnak stepped forward, unarmed but radiating menace. "You fought well," he said. "But now it's just you and me." Takashi faced him, katana raised. "That's all I need." The fight was brutal and unrelenting, Varnak was a seasoned warrior, his strikes powerful and deliberate. Takashi countered with speed and precision, their blades clashing in a dance of skill and determination. "You fight for a dying world," Varnak said between strikes. "I fight for the right to decide its fate," Takashi replied, parrying a heavy blow. The duel pushed both men to their limits. Varnak's strength was matched by Takashi's agility, and every move carried the weight of their opposing ideologies. Finally, Takashi saw an opening. Feinting to the left, he drew Varnak into an overextension and delivered a decisive strike. His katana pierced the general's armor, and Varnak staggered, his weapon falling from his grasp. As Varnak collapsed, Takashi retrieved the satellite's core from the console behind him. The mission was complete, but the war was far from over. He stepped out into the jungle, the first rays of dawn piercing the canopy. For now, Earth had bought itself another chance.